Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think it's a very important topic because of the kids that are involved and the struggles that they face. So thank you. As a parent of a child with a disability, I appreciate you all being here. So you can see from the slide what we'll be covering. There's two major parts to this. The first part is in red, the letters here, is more of what ADHD is and how it manifests. And then the second half is in green, which is what can we do as educators and parents to support and address this. So let me just step back for a second. Is the volume okay? Can someone tell me, does it sound okay? Okay. And then I would like to make this as useful as possible. If you have a question that might be for the good of the group, if you want to ask, that'd be encouraged. If you have an individual question, you can always email me, and I'm happy to follow up individually. So if you have like a particular case and you want to know, what should I do about this, I'm happy to try to collaborate with you. Okay. So a lot of times people want to know, what do I do? And one of the things that I'd like to suggest is what you see here is a lot of this is going to be based on you problem solving. So I think that if you understand ADHD and not just have a list of things you can do, that would prepare you so that you could problem solve and make incidental and individualized responses to student needs, as opposed to me just giving you a bank of suggestions and then you have to figure out which one to use and why. So I will spend a good amount of time on understanding ADHD with the idea that would help you help your students. So very briefly, I'm a longtime general ed teacher, so I know what it's like to work with ADHD from that side. I got a master's in special ed, so I know what it's like from the special ed side. And then currently I do math intervention at Windsor High School, and a lot of my students, a fair proportion of them have ADHD. I also teach math for special ed at UConn and CCSU. So, and then I'm also a parent of a child with autism, not ADHD. But so I have a wide perspective of how the ADHD plays out. So I want to first just look at ADHD and broadly, and then start looking at the objectives for this session. And then please feel free to chime in as you see fit. And I'm happy to help out. My focus on ADHD and my approach to ADHD is largely derived from this gentleman. He is recognized, he's cited in the eligibility documents for ADHD on the State Department of Education website. Their document that they put out regarding ADHD cites Dr. Barclays, and this guy is amazing. So a lot of what I'm doing is based on what I've learned from studying him. First, excuse me, big picture here, ADHD is not just an attention disorder, but it's a self-regulation disorder. So keep that in mind broadly as we go through all of this. It's not just the student doesn't pay attention, which is what I always thought and what a lot of people think. I have a lot of information on the slides. We'll make the slides available to you so that the slides will be an additional resource. So I won't talk through so if you see a lot of information on a slide, that's there as a resource for you to refer back to, but I'm not going to necessarily unpack every little thing that you see. But this is the formal definition of ADHD. I want to mention to you, a lot of people still have the misconception that there's ADD and ADHD. ADD being the person doesn't pay attention. ADHD is the person is hyperactive. In fact, all we have is ADHD, and then we talk about different types, whether it's hyperactive, or if it's not paying attention, or if it's a combination of the two, which is really insidious, particularly challenging for the students. So they actually say ADHD inattentive type and ADHD hyperactive type, and then they say mix. This is Dr. Barclays' definition of ADHD. And the parts that I'd like you to focus on here, behavioral inhibition, sustained attention and resistance to distraction. These are deficit areas, self-regulation. And so I'm going to unpack all this for you. And so it's a lot of information. So I'm going to unpack this for you, but this is available for you. We'll return back to this. Now, very important. This was in my master's work for special ed. This video really struck me because I had fallen to the trap of seeing ADHD as being more of a behavioral issue. And then this video helped me understand that ADHD has a physiological cause to it, like poor eyesight, or whether it's orthopedic handicap or an intellectual disability. It's not just a student making bad choices, but there's actually a brain-based reason for what happens. And so this is about a 6-minute video. Dr. Barkley is fairly dry, but he softens his explanation here at some point, and that's the part where I think it'll really make sense to you all. So let me see if we can get this video. And one of the issues I think I have is I downloaded a lot of Zoom images, and I think my computer now is bandwidth is getting maxed out, as we all are in general. So forgive me for the little bit of a delay here. Okay, so now I did not turn on the volume for sharing, so. Okay. Let me try this again. Okay, so I kicked myself out, but I'm back. All right, let's try this again with Barkley.
Between the events of the now, I want to tell you that there are two parts to this structure that have only recently been discovered in the past decade. George Bush has reviewed all of this literature. By the way, it is not that George Bush. He's a neuroimager at Mass General Hospital. And he has shown that the anterior cingulate is not one, but two separate functional zones. The upper one in red, which I think should have been in blue, as you'll see in a moment, if color is to mean anything. But this involved in helping you make decisions in social conflicts, where there are social consequences now and later for what you're about to do. Whenever you face decisions in which there is a competition, a conflict between the events of the now and what's going to happen later if you act this way, the anterior cingulate helps to negotiate that conflict. It buys you time to think about it and then allows you to execute behavior that is in your long-term welfare, not just your short-term welfare. But the blue structure has now been identified as playing a role whenever there is emotional conflict. Whenever there is an emotion elicited by the moment, But the long-term implications of showing that emotion are detrimental to your well-being. This part of the anterior cingulate lights up, because this is where the frontal lobe is going to suppress the emotional system, and it's going to do it through that zone. We can see that here. This is the opposite hemisphere. So we're looking at the frontal lobe here. We're looking at the anterior cingulate here. We're looking at the very rostral front part of that anterior cingulate here. And we know that this region of the brain projects back into a very old primitive system known as the amygdala and the limbic system at large. The limbic system is the emotional brain. Most species with a brain and spinal cord have this system because this is where emotion comes from, and especially aggression. That is largely an amygdala activity, though it does other things besides that. So what does all of this mean? Well, let us back up. Excuse me. We know that this part of the brain is smaller in people with ADHD. And as you will see on the following diagram, that midline structure does not activate in adults with ADHD, as it does in normal adults who face social or emotional conflicts. The anterior cingulate appears to do nothing. What is that going to do? It is going to leave you prone to not regulating your limbic system. You are going to be very emotionally impulsive. You will be characterized as having low frustration tolerance, impatience, quickness to anger, unable to tolerate waiting, showing your emotions more easily than others, and more raw, unmoderated emotion, hence the term impulsive emotion, and more generally, more easily excitable. Now, if all of that sounds like a mood disorder, it isn't. Mood disorders are where the limbic system is overexpressing abnormal levels of emotion, and individuals have trouble regulating it. That would be bipolar disorder, for instance, which is largely a limbic system disorder. In contrast, ADHD is not a mood disorder. It's a failure to regulate mood disorder. It's a self-regulation of emotion disorder. The emotions the individual is having are quite normal, but most people would have suppressed them, would have inhibited, moderated, self-calmed, self-soothed, and then brought those emotions in line with their longer-term welfare in that situation. That is what the person with ADHD cannot do as well. Inhibit, self-calm, self-soothe, contemplate, and moderate that emotion. So if you're an adult with ADHD, you may find yourself sitting in a business meeting where you have just been insulted. You are much more likely to leap across the table and throttle your supervisor, and you will be fired. Everybody else felt as you felt, thought what you thought, and summarily suppressed it. In their mind, they throttle the supervisor, but it is not released to be expressed through the spinal cord into real behavior and action. And now you understand the difference. The mood is the same, the expression of the mood. Later, if you act this way.
All right, so that really captures the essence of what I'm talking about is it's self-regulation. And Barclay's whole premise about ADHD is this whole self-regulation, and then that's going to be tied into executive functioning, which I'm going to unpack for you here shortly. So just keep that in mind. That one image of the guy jumping across the table because he's not self-regulating and going, well, that's an extreme example, obviously, but that really is symbolic or representative of the bigger picture that we'll be talking about. So self-regulation, it's actions that you're taking that are directed towards yourself. And so here's aspects of ADHD that Barclay talks about in his book and his videos. So I'll give you a moment to look at that. these are all major points that I'm going to address. So you'll see these kind of sprinkled throughout. The self-regulation I just started talking about. We're going to talk about executive functioning. We're going to talk about this being a performance issue, especially in a social context. And then we'll talk about ADHD in terms of future goals, such as repressing your desire to throttle the boss because it impacts your future goals. That's an example of what we mean by future directed. And then no cure. We'll talk about that.
Hey, Randy. Yeah, I was just going to say, we're on slide.
Any of us in education or parents, we've seen things like this. So we have, just as an example, these are some, this is a student with ADHD, and this is how his ADHD manifests in class.
Randy?
And a lot of us can experience that. Let's see here.
Randy?
Yes.
We're on a do now poll questions on Zoom slide.
Oh, hold on, let me pause for a second here. And I apologize here. Let me circle back to that and get this audio thing. Okay, I think I can hear now. You had a question?
No, we were on the wrong slide. We were on a poll questions slide.
Really?
It said do now polls question. So we didn't see the list of, I think, objectives that you were talking about.
Oh boy.
He mentioned the student A scenario, like when he acting up, but we didn't see that.
Okay, so my apologies. This is so apparently the PowerPoint slides, you don't get to see them moving. So I went through multiple slides there. So let me show you. Thank you for stopping me. Okay, so what I have here is a PDF that will be made available to you.
There we go.
Okay, so I had each of these things. So let me just backtrack for a moment and get us caught up here. So here are the two parts of the session that I referred to. So the first part in red is the characteristics and what ADHD is. And the green is the supports and the strategies, which I'll cover for you. And then I had mentioned that I want to invest time on understanding ADHD to help you be more independent in how you address it. I mentioned some stuff about myself. And then I said, let's talk about an overview first. And here's Barclays' book that I have, and I looked at his videos. He has a lot of great videos out, which you saw one of them. I talked about ADHD is not an attention disorder, but a self-regulation disorder. And you can see that Barclay really fleshed that out. That actually should be a picture of me staring at the cake. Here's the definition, which you guys can look at. This PDF will be made available to you. And then here's Barclay's view of ADHD. A lot of it being self-regulation, self-attention, which we'll unpack. And then here was the link to the video. And then you could see that he talked about the brain imaging showing a difference in the brain, which is just remarkable. And I'll mention too that I felt very I was a little embarrassed. I felt a little bit ashamed because I'd always worked with kids with ADHD, and I got caught up in thinking that their behavior was just bad behavior. And then this was like me. I realized, okay, this is a physiological, and this was a real game changer for me in terms of how I approach these kids. And then we talked about aspects of ADHD. So this is what I had said, when I said, hey, take a look at this, this is what I was referring to. So these are key points that will play out in this presentation. And so they're sprinkled throughout, and you'll see these key issues pop up again. And then here is my student. Sorry, scrolling through a PDF is not quite as smooth, but at least you can see it. And so I think anyone with a parent or an educator can relate to this in seeing behaviors. And when I say behaviors, not, traditionally we think of behaviors as, oh, bad behavior. Behaviors is any action that a person takes. So I mean behaviors in more of the clinical sense. And then I want to take this to the next level. So we start talking about adults with ADHD. Anyone here an adult with ADHD? You see a lot of the same type of issues, obviously in a more adult setting with ADHD. And when I'm training, I train new math teachers for the Department of Education, the Department of Higher Ed. And I've had a couple guys with ADHD, very smart, very sharp guys. One guy struggled and couldn't make it through the program, even though I tried to be very adaptive for him. And another one did, and he actually shared a write-up, said that I could share this with others. So I would like to give you a moment to read this. This is from a guy who's studying to be a math teacher. And so he's already gotten his college degree. So I'll let you read that.
Can you zoom it a little bit bigger? So
I can, yes. So let me zoom in and I'll scroll down for you, okay? Does that work better for you, Maria?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And I'll scroll down in a moment. So the thing that gets me is, imagine this guy, he went through his whole childhood and adolescence not knowing what was going on. And then he had, the interaction he had with people and the challenges, like with a teacher trying to show him up or not responding very well. And I just can't imagine how frustrating and upsetting that must have been, in that it's constant. And then what's powerful about this is, if we're in a position to help someone like this, we can make a huge difference in the life of this one student. And then, of course, there's many other students like this. So we have an opportunity to really impact. And I think as a teacher, I'm like, that's why I wanted to teach, is I want to have an impact. Well, here's an opportunity to impact someone's life in a very positive way or in a negative way. Any questions on this? It's pretty powerful. Okay, so here's a kind of a graphic organizer of what I'm going to talk about. So the first column here, so the first column here, that's the physiological characteristics. So we start there. What's happening inside the individual? And then the second piece then is, how is that manifesting? How do we see it? We don't see what's in blue there in their brain, but we see the red. And then on the other hand, what do we do? What are the things here that we can do to support the student? So the first two columns is what I want to talk about first, and that is, what is ADHD and how is it playing out? And then the third and fourth columns on the left, on the right, are now what are some things that we can do to try to address it? And so I'll go through this, but I want to first kind of connect some dots here for you and see how these interact with each other. And then please let me know if you want me to slow down, go back, answer a question, anything I can do to help, please let me know. So these are the actual objectives, and this is the agenda. So just like with the graphic organizer, the left column down through the right column, let's look at the physiological characteristics. Let's look at the behavioral characteristics. And then we move on to supports and services. And then we also get into some instructional strategies. So let's start with physiological characteristics. And we have to dig a lot deeper than I think most people realize, that I realized until I started reading Barclays' book. So the big thing is, again, I'm going to, the second bullet point, I'll just focus on that because it's a little easier. The whole idea behind executive functions. Well, first of all, Barclay has made the case that ADHD is an executive functioning issue. So let's build off of that. So we understand ADHD, we have to understand executive functioning, executive functions. So executive functions are, in short, self-regulation functions that you use to achieve goals. Think of it that way. Obviously, there's a lot more to that, but that's kind of getting to the essence of it. And so he mentioned that in his example about you regulate yourself so you don't throttle your boss and then get fired, because that interferes with your long-term goals. So you do something rash in the short term that really impacts your long-term goals. So that's what we mean by this executive functions. Now, here are various executive functions. So when I read Barclay, he was talking about, man, there's a whole bunch of executive functions. There's no standard. And so people are pulling different things together saying these are executive functions. So I'm sharing with you Barclay's list of executive functions, where he took others that he's seen and combined them together. And so so this is where I'm starting, is what's going on in the brain. Well, if ADHD is an executive functioning issue, it's having problems with your executive functions, let's look at what executive functions are, and then let's talk about what happens when you don't have your self-awareness like you should, or when you don't have your self-restraint like you should. So that's kind of the direction I'm going with these. Again, please let me know. So this takes a little bit of unpacking, but I think this is very powerful when you start to see what he's talking about. So let's take my student again with my Algebra 1 student. So these executive functioning or deficits with these executive functions then can translate into these behavioral problems. Again, behavioral, not just being bad behavior, but what he's doing is what I mean by that. So I don't mean to paint him as a bad kid, obviously. So I want to kind of connect these dots, connect the executive functioning issues with these behaviors that we see. So let's just talk briefly about that. So going back to the graphic organizer, for example, if the student is struggling with self-restraint, it makes sense then that he's going to act impulsively. If the student struggles with his verbal or with his nonverbal working memory or with his verbal working memory, then he's having these working memory issues. And I think Barclays then making the point that there's two types of working memory. And so that plays out for a student where you're as a teacher, if you're talking too much, if you're putting too much information out at one time, you're overloading their working memory. And they are more likely to have trouble with working memory than other students. So that's important. So that's an example of how the executive functioning deficit is playing out in a classroom, for example. Again, we're just connecting dots. If you have trouble with the emotional self-regulation, same with the self-restraint, you're going to have impulsive behaviors. And then planning and problem solving are major executive functioning issues. If you have trouble with planning and problem solving, you're going to have a reduced time horizon, which I'll explain in a little bit. And then you're also going to be impulsive, because if you're impulsive, you're not thinking long-term, you're thinking short-term. Okay, and then there's a couple other behaviors that Barclay talks about. He talks about performance points, executive age, and limited capacity. So I'm going to unpack those as well. And then what I wanted is to give you guys a broad graphic organizer that organizes all this. Not that you're going to understand all these pieces, but that you'll understand some, and then perhaps you could come back to this presentation or the slides, and then you could then start figuring out more of this, because there's no way for you to understand all of this. So I'm not going to try to unpack every little detail for you, but I want to give you a solid starting point. So here's an analogy for how the executive functioning issues play out. So let me connect some dots in a much bigger way for you. So let's look at an analogy of driving a car. And then we'll use this to kind of explain executive functioning. So first of all, let's talk about, there's basic skills for driving a car. And this is going to be related to kind of like your executive functioning in terms of ADHD. So that's kind of how the analogy is connecting. So you're driving a car. Well, first of all, you have the most rudimentary skills. What is your reaction time? What is your motor movement like? Your arms, your hands, your feet. What is your vision like? What is your coordination like? Because you're doing multiple things at one time when you're driving a car. So these are basic skills. This doesn't mean you can actually drive. If you have good vision, doesn't mean you could be a good driver. It doesn't mean you know how to drive. But these are some skills that you need for driving. But then we got to take this up a level. So there's another level of skills that we need to talk about. How do you actually operate the vehicle? As far as turning the wheel and hitting the brake and opening the door, all these little things. How do you interact with a vehicle? So are you slamming the door? Are you hitting the accelerator too fast? Or are you turning really fast? So how's your interaction? And then the properties of the vehicle. you know, the bumper and the lights and the headlights and what are the different aspects of the vehicle. So these are the next level. So now what we've done is we've gone from just you and your brain and your physiological characteristics to now how does your physiological characteristics play out in operating a car? But you're still in isolation. You're still just you and the car. So now we got to start talking about how does this play out at the next level? So now it's not just you and your eyesight and your reaction time. And it's not just how you steer the car and how you turn the signal or turn on your lights or back up. But now the next level is how do you do all that in the presence of others? And notice there's rules of the road. There's subordinating your activity, like when you let someone else go through the four-way stop, if someone's trying to turn and you let them go ahead and turn in front of you. So now there's this interaction with others. And I hope you start making the connection to ADHD, where we're going to talk about how ADHD plays out in a community aspect. And so let's switch over to ADHD now. So ADHD has physiological characteristics that are happening. Just like in driving a car, they look at your vision, there's your reaction time. For an individual with ADHD, we can talk about their physiological characteristics, and that's more their brain functions, their executive functions. And then you take it to the next level. How do the executive functions then, how are they used to organize yourself and to and regulate your own emotions and help you be independent and manage time? But then the next level is, how does this play out in the presence of others? Because you have social exchanges where you interact with people, and you have trading. They call it, Barclays calls it economic behavior, or how you're in an ecosystem. There's a give and take in an ecosystem. And then the social independence in terms of how you interact with others to attain goals, or you can how you use others to help you attain goals. So there could be some interdependence. So that's what I want you to understand is ADHD is not just, I'm not paying attention, but it's, I'm not paying attention to how does that interact with others. See, if I'm not paying attention to you as a teacher, now I need makeup work, I need extra help. Now I'm off task, I'm doing something else. So it's not just the student in isolation, but it's the student with these executive functioning issues and how they're playing out in the classroom. Okay, so let me stop there before we get into the behavioral part. That's the heavy lifting there. The rest of it's a little bit more straightforward. Any questions on any of the executive functioning parts? That's the hardest part to unpack for people. So anybody? You can always email me again. You put something in the chat if you like. Okay, so now we've talked about the physiological pieces. Now let's talk about how this is playing out in the classroom or in the school. So you can start to connect these dots, as I tried to earlier, about how these executive functioning deficits play out into the classroom. So we need to talk about executive functioning and ADHD in the environment. This is incredibly powerful information right here, because this addresses learning. This is a model for information processing. So let me explain the parts, and then you can start to see how this plays out with ADHD. So first you have some you have the stimuli. You guys have stimuli right now. Some of you put yourselves on mute because you have a lot of stimuli happening in your house, which is why I'm not in my house. and you get stimuli from me droning on about executive functioning, and then you're hungry and you smell things and you feel things and it's a little cold. So you're bombarded by stimuli. The brain has a sensory register that will filter out a lot of information. So you may hear something but not pay attention to it. You've ever been in a situation where you're in a daydream and someone calls your name and you don't hear them because you filtered that out for whatever reason. Well, imagine these kids, they have sensory registers and they're filtering stuff out. And a lot of times they might be filtering me out or their parent out or the filtering out the homework assignment but they're paying attention to some things and they're not going to pay attention to others. That's what the sensory register is doing. So the idea is, how do we get stimuli from the lesson or from the homework, or whether it's the chores at home or whatever? How do we get these through the register so that they can move on into the working memory? So that's a key thing that we'll address later on. And then the idea is, once they get to the working memory, oh, well, they have trouble with working memory, visual and non-visual working memory. So how do we make use of this? How do we help support their working memory to move information into the long-term memory? So that's something that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the behavior characteristics, because if they're not paying attention to the lesson, then they're paying attention to something else. For example. Now, this is huge. This is one of the biggest points that I can make, or that Barclay makes, and I'm just passing this on from Barclay to you. So ADHD is a performance issue. It's not a knowledge issue. Like these kids, like a lot of times they know they're not supposed to do something, but then they do it anyway, as Barclay mentioned in his example with the boss and the employee. So people think that they don't have the knowledge and we need to give them the knowledge. No, it's a performance issue. And the idea then is you want to address ADHD at a performance point. And I'll talk more about that. So let's keep in mind that it's a performance issue. This one is very powerful. He talks about an executive age in terms of executive functioning. So let's think of reading age. So we have grade level that you could read at, and then age level. And so we talk about someone's reading level in terms of their grade level. And so someone could be in 6th grade, but they're reading at a 5th grade level. Well, the same thing happens with executive functions. Someone could be in 6th grade, but their executive functioning, or they could be 12 years old, but their executive functioning is that of an 8-year-old. And that's what he's saying. In fact, what he's saying is there's a 30 or 40% delay in the development of executive functionings. That means an 18-year-old would have this, with ADHD, may have the self-regulation of a 12-year-old. And this maintains throughout life. So at some point we stop developing. And so when you hit that age, your brain stops developing, then your executive functioning is what it is at that age, which is why the guy that wrote that long 2 paragraphs for us, he talked about the challenges he has as an adult because he has some executive functioning deficits. I think that's incredibly powerful. Let me stop there for a moment. Any questions about what I've covered so far in the red or anything else? So then for me, when I, as an educator, when I'm bringing my A game as a teacher and I see my guy over there with ADHD and he's playing Tetris and I can see that on his computer when he should be doing his work, you know, I have to redirect him, but I also kind of understand why that happens. And so then I'm at a better place when I understand why this happens and I know how to work with him instead of just being frustrated with him. So I think that's important to understand. It's kind of, to me, it's kind of like you have a student, we don't blame a student who's sitting in the back of the room with poor eyesight. We don't blame them for not seeing the board, but then we blame a student with ADHD for not having this self-regulation that he or she should have of someone of equivalent age. And it's a physiological issue, just like the eyesight. That's kind of what happened with me when I came to terms with what's going on with ADHD for my students. The reduced time horizon is goals, longer term goals that are out there, extended a few days. So think of those of you with kids, and when you, or niece or nephew, when the child is in second or first grade and they want to stay up late, and you go, you'll be really tired tomorrow, and they go, no, I won't, I'll be fine. And you say, no, you stayed up late Saturday and you're really cranky Sunday morning. No, I'll be fine. They don't have that time horizon that we do. They don't connect the present with a day or 2 or 3 days later. Their time horizon is much shorter. So that's an executive functioning issue. So they have a reduced time horizon. So when we're talking to the student about, you better study today because it'll affect your test 2 weeks from now, that's beyond their time horizon. So that doesn't resonate with them. So what you have to do is you have to kind of move the time horizon closer in terms of your expectations, so that it's in their range, it's within their time horizon. And I'll talk more about that when we get into the second half. Any questions on that? So Barclay's really smart. So he really connected his work with that in the classroom where he was explaining this. And so as a side note, I was really impressed with him because he really is this really intelligent, nerdy scientist type guy. He's making a connection with what was really happening with these kids, individuals in life. And I was really taken by that. He's really sharp.
Hey, Randy, can I pause
Yes.
you for 1 second? Maria, did you have a question? I keep thinking that you're trying to unmute yourself and you can't do it quick enough, and then Randy talks again.
I know. I saw you doing something, Maria, and I'm like,
I just wanted to ask if is a different kind of ADHD, because I have a student that he have a good memory. He remember things more than I do, but he's a senior now. But when I worked with him since he was in 3rd grade. He was very aggressive, verbally aggressive with the teacher when he saw all pile up the math and work. So I started working with him very slowly, covering up the rest of the math, just one problem at a time. And I gradually help him, but he is very good in memorizing things. And when you mention about, kids don't remember, I mean, it comes to my mind, is there different kind of, functioning?
So there is different types, because you have the inattentive type and you have the hyperactive type, but the attention piece could be this. It's the information processing. We know that if you do something that the student with ADHD likes, they could lock in on it and do great. They will focus on, and my daughter, I wonder if she has ADHD. If it's something she's interested in, she'll pay close attention. If it's not something she's interested in, she's not remembering to do these things. So what happens is, if the information is meaningful to them and relevant and interesting, then that stimuli will pass right on through to long-term memory, and then they can recall it and pull it back into working memory because they're interested and they're focused on it. Yeah. And so I think that could be the case.
Yeah, that answered my question very well, because he hates math and he's not, he just gets sick. But history, you can ask any question and he will tell you everything about Abraham Lincoln and everybody else.
There you go. I suspect that's the case, right? Okay, so let me see if I, okay, so we're going through some more of the behavioral characteristics. Okay, so we talked about the time horizon. This is another important one here. So this is the working memory. If they have a limited working memory, then it's like a computer. They're much more likely to buffer. They're quicker to start buffering. And so if, just like our computers, if they start buffering, you can't get it to do stuff. And it's not because it's being obstinate and rebellious. It's just that physiologically, it's just not processing. And so that's important to know, is how do we address that as educators and people who support them. The one everyone kind of understands is the impulsivity. Again, not focusing on long-term goals. You have to understand that that's kind of why that could be wired in them. And then this one's also, I think, this is kind of hidden. The executive functioning tasks, with the heavier lifting that the brain does, uses up more of our battery. It's like you get your phone, and when you start playing videos or certain games that draw a lot of power, then your battery drops a lot faster. And so if you're giving them simple tasks to do, it's not going to tax them as much. But if you're giving them some heavy lifting, some things to think about, making them self-regulate, making them plan and do all these executive functioning things, their battery is going to drop faster than it will for other students. And I think you can start to see then, what do you do about that? Well, automatically you start thinking, well, maybe I give them a break more often, which is something I will address. Okay, so that is 1 hour in, and we're halfway through. That's the what is ADHD. Any other questions about what ADHD is before I start talking about supports and instruction?
As I mentioned at the beginning, I was going to do 1 hour, so I will, because I have another Zoom meeting, so it won't.
Absolutely, Maria. So it's recorded, and then you can always contact me if you have additional questions, okay?
All right. Thank you so much. I enjoy
Okay,
your
nice
class
to see
very
you.
much. Okay, thanks a lot. Have a good night.
Night.
Good night, everybody.
Okay, so
Wait, Randy, we have
Yeah.
a question. Ellen.
Yes, Ellen.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, going back to when you said the executive age, oftentimes is 30 to 40% delayed in development, and gave the example of the 18-year-old with the 12-year-old executive functioning. So, and I thought you said at some point that just stops. So are you saying that a person can reach a certain age and not have the full level of executive functioning because that development just isn't happening anymore?
Yes, Ellen. And then again, that's directly from Barclays. And so, I forgot to mention, he's a PhD doctor that does all this brain research. But that's what his point was, is that they're behind. And then as you get older, of course, they're developing, right? But then at some point, the brain stops. Now they're at the same age. So let's say they're both 18 years old, they're 19, there's 20, and I forget what age it is, but you said it right, Ellen. They hit that age, that's it. That's the level. That's like height. Like I tell my son Lucas, he's short, and I'm like, and he realizes, he goes, at some point, this is it for me. And I'm like, yep, that's me too. So it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty powerful to understand and that's why these guys, these two guys that I had go through our program, they were struggling, and they struggle the same way that my high school kids would, or the younger kids that I help, because they're behind everyone else, and that's just how it's going to be. And then of course they learn how to compensate, and some learn better than others.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But it definitely, I can think of a friend of mine who I remember her saying when her son was between probably 26 and 30 years old. I mean, he was still struggling dramatically, and he had been diagnosed with ADHD. And she, of course, was always shaking her head like, why can't he make this decision? Or why can't he do this? Or why can't he do that? And it sounds like he may have, been reaching that max out phase, and that's it. He just needs more supports to get him to the point where someone with full executive functioning would be able to handle the same situation.
Ellen, yeah, you nailed it. That's a great connection to what you saw personally. And that's from what I gathered from Barclay. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why I think this is so powerful, because when I talk about impacting lives, the more we can do now, the better we can help them learn to compensate for that. I mean, similar with vision. I have a student with a visual impairment, and his mom explains, he has trouble with this because of his visual. And we're both like, yep, we understand, but then he has to learn to accommodate for that, because he's gonna have it the rest of his life. So you nailed it. You're right.
Well, and I am particularly looking at one student that I have that I think this very well could be his problem.
Right. Yes. And so then the good thing is that we'll start talking then about some ideas about how to help with this. And I'll tell you too, I think from all the classifications, I find this to be the most challenging to support, because it's misunderstood. And like my son with autism, it's pretty straightforward. It's not easy, but people understand it a lot better. They understand that that's just how it is. And he has certain behaviors and they understand why. Whereas for ADHD, like you said, with the friends or the people, the mom didn't understand. Even the mom didn't understand, which is understandable. So hopefully we'll now hit some things that'll help with those students you're talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so the idea here is we're not going to cure it. I mean, obviously we're not going to. Barclay's not going to cure it. So any type of supports must be permanent, or not any of them, but a lot of supports may need to be permanent. And the idea is you're not going to reduce the disability, so then you try to reduce the impairment. So so like with Magoo here, the cartoon guy, his sight is the way it is. So then we're not going to change his sight, but we can minimize the impairment by giving him glasses or whatever else supports he needs. Big print for his reading. So let's talk about how we reduce the impairment. So this is, I think the video will work a lot better now because I'm not in PowerPoint. A lot of you will remember these commercials. Follow the green line. I always forget the company, but I always remember follow the green line. Speaking of,
with just a few adjustments, the plan we worked on for your retirement makes sense.
There we go. Buffering, just like we talked about. So I think it'll kick in, but the idea is she's his financial advisor, and this company, and I forget what, Fidelity. They always said follow the green line, which is the plan that they have for the guy's retirement, and that's an accommodation. That's an external accommodation that's being provided to help this guy achieve goals, and then that's really analogous to what we're talking about for a student with ADHD. So I may come back to that if we hear him talking, because I like this 20 seconds, 30 seconds. But now I got to find the PDF.
Stay on track.
What is?
That's the guidance you get from Fidelity.
Now
Nice.
it plays.
Stay on the line.
Whatever your destination, Fidelity has the people, guidance, and investments to help you find your way.
So anyway, he stops to look at he stops to look at a, no, that's the PowerPoint. I think I closed mine out too. Oh, it's ironic. I'm talking about the supports and then here I am doing this stuff. I'm just going to share. I'm going to roll with it and I'm going to just jump to this here. Here we go. So that was follow the green line, and that's the idea here. Is these guys need a line for them to help them follow, and then eventually develop some supports. So here's connecting some of the dots. So the red are the behavior issue, the behavioral, again, not bad behavior, but more clinical behaviors that are exhibited, and then what I'll do is I'll go through each of these blue supports and services. So the first one, the idea is to address the challenge at a performance point. So let me explain to you what that means and then talk about what we can do about it. So when we're teaching a child to ride a bike, we don't have them sit at a desk while I sit there with my, as a teacher and start pointing to a chart saying, this is how you ride a bike. What we do is we actually get them on the bike. That's the performance point. That's when they're actually doing the thing we're trying to teach them to do. So the idea, so a performance point, that's the situation or setting in which the student has to perform the task we want them to perform. So the idea is they have trouble performing the things that they need to do. So what can we do to help them perform the things that they need to do? Well, we want to focus on the actual performance, where they actually have to perform the task. So, for example, my student with ADHD, he would walk into the classroom and start walking around socializing with everyone. So he was not entering the class appropriately. So that was a performance point. How does he enter class and start class appropriately? And so one of the things that I did for him is, this is not the exact checklist, but I made a checklist for him listing the steps that he needed to follow. And then I would give him immediate feedback, and then I would train him on it. I would stand at the door and I would guide him to his desk, and then I'd give him a check for that, or whatever token or whatever may be appropriate for him, or whatever works for him. So I've used these in high school, middle school, elementary school. Here's a more simple version that I've used, and I create these on my own. So this one I created. This one is actually for a couple guys with autism, and they would self-check. They would check themselves. They would go through and check off each thing at the beginning of class. I created this for an elementary school kiddo who liked owls. And so it's like if she did the things she was supposed to do, she would get an owl and we would check it off. And the joke was it'd be a snake. She wasn't scared of snakes. It was just kind of a joke, and she was good with the joke. So that's an example of how you can address the performance issue. So one of the challenges that they have that Barclay talks about is they have trouble performing the things they're supposed to do. Not because they don't know how they're supposed to, it's because they just don't, because of self-discipline, self-restraint. So one of the ways of addressing that could be immediate feedback, like with a checklist. So that's kind of, that's just one example. I'm going to go through the others. Any question on how I'm trying to connect these dots here? Or any questions about what I mean by performance points? Anybody? Okay. The next one is the working memory. They buffer so they can process less information. So the idea then is to break things down for them. Well, this is an example of a rubric that I use to help a student learn how to organize a 3-ring binder notebook for class and how to keep track of notes and handouts. And the way it worked is each handout was like a page of a book. So I did a table of contents page, and the student would, you can see at the top here, let me circle some things for you here. So at the top here, I would have the student write the date and the page number. So this would be the third page of the student's notebook. And then that would be listed in here. And that was a way of training the students on how to organize their notebook. And so, you invest some time up front. And the idea is not for the student to go organize his notebook with somebody once a week in a resource study, but that he would organize his notebook at the performance point. So in my class, if I gave you a handout, I would like you to put it right in your notebook, right in the next, at the end of all your other papers, so you know exactly where it is. That's the performance point. So the idea is, let's teach him how to organize a notebook at the time he's supposed to be doing it, not in isolation. Another example. This is what I did actually for the math teachers that I'm training, is they had a unit plan they had to create. And so one of the things that I could do for a student is I could break it up into parts and give it to them in parts instead of the whole thing at one time. Another thing that I would do is I would break it down and show them, and in bold print here, you can see I had the deliverables listed. So they knew exactly what they were supposed to turn in. So I broke it down for them so that they didn't have to do quite as much reading, and they could see the different sections. And then you could apply that to a student with a ADHD or pretty much any disability. Any questions on that one? Here is impulsivity. You can anticipate maybe when there's some impulsivity. You can plan ahead, do cues and prompts. I had so again, my student, I knew he would walk into class and then he'd impulsively want to go see somebody or talk to somebody. So I anticipated that, and I would wait at the door and then I would guide him. I would anticipate when a student might need to go use the restroom and he just blurts out, "Can I go to the restroom?" And so I might give him a pass or something, and he could just hold it up when he needed to go to the restroom. So I'd anticipate these times when he could be impulsive, and I could try to head it off. At the beginning of class, one of the things you can do is do what's called an HP, a high preference task. And that is give them something that they're interested in doing. As who's our friend that just left? She talked about her student that could remember all the history stuff. So if you could find a task that student likes to do at the beginning of class, that could get them settled and focused right away, as opposed to some of the boring math thing that I wanted them to do. So you could anticipate that and help avoid some of the impulsivity. I build in breaks. I taught a consumer math class for individuals with disabilities. So everything was individualized. So what I did is, instead of a lesson plan, I created individual agendas for the students. So this was each of these circles is a different student. And this guy actually has autism, but this would apply to a kid with ADHD as well, or any kid you're trying to help them focus. So for this guy, if he completed the first task, he got a break. He also liked jelly beans. So I would give him some jelly beans and he would look at the weather on his computer for a couple minutes. And then he would go right back to work. And then I'd build in breaks because they can only sustain attention for so long. So that's an example of how you can try to address some of the impulsivity where they're just going to choose to go do something else. You can also anticipate issues such as when they enter class. What I do is, and then I think it's Ellen's, I can see Ellen's wall back there. I can see that she has similar organization. So this is an example of how I would organize my high school class. Each class subject was a different color. So Algebra 2 was green. A higher level math class, I forget what we called it back then, was all yellow. So if I have a student who's in the advanced math class, he knew that he was the yellow color. So anything in yellow, he knew then that was for him. So he knew to look at that. And then I had my objectives written. I had in a yellow document sign, it said objectives. So anything under the yellow objectives was for his class because he was yellow. Much easier for him to follow the color and give him structure. The other thing too is to prevent them from getting up out of their seat and going over and getting stuff. You could prevent that by having all the stuff that they need at their desk, so they don't have to raise their hand, say, I need to go sharpen my pencil. Do you have a pencil I can borrow? I need some scissors. I need some paper. So that helps with the impulsivity. Any questions on that? Another challenge is their limited capacity. So we talked about breaks already. So you could set up a way for them to have a break. I had heard about this, and apparently this is a thing in some places. Of course, I would get permission from administration and parent. But what I've seen here, this is not exact. This is an image I found that kind of captures it. The student with ADHD was given a desk, and then also had, with colored tape, had a section around his desk that was in effect, was his office. And so as long as he remained in his office, he could get out of his desk. So he get antsy, so he could get up and stand and walk around and do whatever, but so it gave him that freedom to get up and do something, move around some, but he was also restricted from walking around the class and being a distraction. And I can see some students that would work really well for. And so those are different supports that could be implemented to handle some of the behaviors that we're talking about. So the next thing would be to get into instructional strategies. Any questions on the supports? So again, what I'm hoping is these give you some ideas. This is not an exhaustive list of what to do, but it shows you, I'm trying to help you see a connection between what is ADHD and what are the challenges and how it plays out in a way that's more organized for your thinking. Because we all kind of get the idea about ADHD, and then start to see how you can have supports address it. And then you could start problem solving some on your own, as you already do, to try to meet student needs. So for instructional strategies, we come right back to the same information processing. All the things that I talked about there, that will play out as far as your instruction. So I'll talk, keep that in the back of your mind as I talk about instruction. So the first one, the performance point. If a student has trouble at the performance point, you could head it off for a kid with ADHD who has some energy, or if they get bored and tune out, especially if you're talking a lot and they tune you out, give them hands-on activities. You could even give it individualized, where maybe they're doing something, a student with ADHD is doing something hands-on while the other students are doing something on a worksheet if necessary. So here's an example. This is how I teach perimeter and area, and I did this with a 4th grade class in Hartford. I start by giving them cutouts of fence pieces, and I give them these animals, and I say, these are your animals. You don't want them to run away, so build a rectangular fence for them. And now they're busy building the fence. They don't realize it, but they're actually learning because they're building perimeter. And so when I refer to perimeter here, I can then draw it on the rectangle and say, remember that fence you built? That's this thing right here. Now they have something concrete to attach it to. But then I can spend less time on this boring math stuff, and I can spend more time on this. And now I have more hands-on activities for them to try to engage them at a performance point. So anything that you can do hands-on, that's one way to address the performance point issue. ongoing assessment, immediate feedback. I think that's one of the areas really most overlooked in education. I know in math, we tend to like give assessments and feedback like every other week. And then what could happen is a student with ADHD and other students are not paying attention as well, not learning, not following along. And then you don't realize it until they take a quiz 2 weeks later. So the idea is, how can we give them more immediate feedback? And I'll use math as an example, but it could apply to any type of learning. So so you have this feedback loop where they do something, whether it's learning in a foreign language or whether it's reading or whatever, they perform an action. There's some outcome for that, and they get feedback on that outcome. They produce, they do a problem on their own. They try to ride the bike on their own. They try to read a passage on their own. They're trying to cite some characteristics of France or something from social studies. And then you can give them immediate feedback. Same thing with behavior. They perform an action like my student walking into class. And then I can give him, he walks into class, he sits down, and I can give him immediate feedback for that. And then what I'll do is I use the assessments, I call them checkpoints, where I say, here, you try it on your own, and then I'm going to give you feedback on it. And that can apply to all areas, not just math. So I give quizzes almost every day when I teach, or I'm assessing and giving them feedback on work that they produce every day, so that there's not only accountability, but also that feedback. So that's this piece. Any of these issues will be addressed if you can give them immediate feedback. And then the last couple, the chunking. Chunking is just what I call it is cutting up the hot dog. We have when we had the kids, our kids are little babies or toddlers sitting in the high chair, and we give them a hot dog to eat. We don't just give them a whole hot dog. We cut up the hot dog into little pieces, and they get older, the pieces get a little bit bigger. So that's what chunking is you're cutting up the hot dog. You're cutting up whatever activity you're giving them so they can do just part of it at a time. And what I'll do is I'll take a math problem, and these are all the steps in a single math problem. And when I train new math teachers, I train them to address one part at a time. So when they have this math problem, so now you don't have to know anything about math. You just have to know that's a lot of math stuff that someone has to do. And I don't like math, so that's already too much. But if you could cut it in half and do this part first, and then do an assessment to see if they get it, and then do this part second, then that's a lot easier to manage. But math teachers tend to teach the whole thing at one time. And so the idea is I train them to cut up the problems, or and cut it like they're cutting up a hot dog. You can do that with any subject area. See how you can cut it up. For example, in reading, instead of giving them this entire document to read, you could give them part of the document to read and then debrief them. So what you could do is give them this part to read. Then you can give them feedback. Tell me what you read. Tell me what you learned. Why did someone do that? So he mowed the lawns. Why did he mow the lawns? Okay, now continue reading. And so you're cutting up the hot dog for them. Now, one thing that I heard someone mention that I thought was brilliant is to help a student read. And I think it was my guy with ADHD that I taught. What he did is he took this same passage here, this same passage right here. The idea is to take this passage, but then that same passage here is presented only a couple lines at a time. You could take a sheet of paper, cut a rectangle out of it, lay it on top of the reading, And then the student simply moves the paper down, and that way the student can only see a couple lines at a time when they're reading. So someone mentioned that, and I thought that was just brilliant. And that one guy that I'm friends with, he said that's what someone did for him when he was growing up. So these are things you can do to cut up the hot dog, to give them less information at a time and give them more immediate feedback. Okay, so now I'll do my closure, and then certainly field any questions you have. So we're talking about ADHD as a self-regulation disorder. It's not just an attention issue. It's intimately involved with executive functions. It's a performance issue. So focus on the performance points where the student's supposed to perform the actions. There's a social component. It's not just in isolation, but it's how this plays out with others. There's a future component to it where they have reduced time horizon. And there's no cure. I mean, this is a physiological issue, and there's no pill that they take that makes it go away. They can address symptoms, but it doesn't make it go away. And just like with a vision issue, unless you can get corrective surgery. And so this is something that they have to deal with for the rest of their life. And so the more we can do now, the more we can prepare them for that. And so we talked about instruction and services that could address that. There are a couple resources here. The top one is a link to the actual State Department of Education ADHD report, where they talk about classification, classifying someone with ADHD, or the eligibility. And then the next one is actually some blog posts where I gathered this information from Barclays and from others, and that link will take you to what I had found. And then I'll just finish by saying, what we're doing when we work with this, in whatever capacity, is we're working with kids so that they're not in the same situation as this guy, right? I mean, they're going to have ADHD the rest of their lives, but how can we mitigate a lot of the challenges and prepare them? And so these are some ideas that Barclay came up with that I'm just kind of shaping to present to you guys. So that's really Barclays stuff. And then I just kind of took a teacher perspective of it. So that is the ADHD presentation. Any questions?
Hi, Randy. I have a question.
Yes.
My name is Yvette, and I work as an instructional coach. So I work with lots of teachers. I'm actually asking this question both as a parent and as an instructional coach. So we work with lots of kids who are not diagnosed with ADHD, but present as. And so there's no like formal document saying that this is a requirement for that teachers have to modify instruction or provide these supports for students. And so what do you say to teachers who say that they're already too busy to provide these extra supports? Or what do you say to a parent who wants to get support for their child, but their child is not officially diagnosed with ADHD?
Yeah, okay, that's great questions. So yeah, that's tricky, right? Because you can't, especially as a coach, you realize this, you can't make someone do it. So what I try to do is when I'm training new math teachers, and then I'll take this and move it over to actual practicing teachers. When I talk to the teachers I'm training, I ask them, I say, why do you want to teach? And you want to impact lives. And I go, okay, well then here's an opportunity to impact lives. So I try to get them to think in the bigger picture, like step back, what's going on? What can we do here? And I find that I have to do that for myself, as busy as I am. And I think of a guy today that I saw, and I have to step back, and he has ADHD, and I have to be mindful and say, you know what, this guy's got some challenges. It doesn't excuse it, but it helps me understand it. So I think helping them step back and think about it. So for your teachers, I think the first thing would be, let me just tell you a little bit about ADHD. Maybe you share that video. Maybe, oh, I got another video that is powerful that I need to share with you. Let me just write a quick note and I'll get this to Jen. Okay. So I would say one is maybe appeal to their sense of purpose. Why are they teaching? And then the other one would be talking to them in terms of, you know, these behaviors are going to continue. What can we do? How can we collaborate to try to deal with this so that it makes it better for everybody? Because we know it's going to keep happening. So that's more of like, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, like the most basic is safety, and then you need food before you start worrying about other people. And so maybe appealing to them, like, this will help you. And I find that when I do that, I get a lot of mileage from teachers, because when I say this is going to help you, and it's also helping this kid, and then they go, okay, yeah, this is Maslow at work here. This will help me. I need this. So maybe saying, you know, we know this is going to happen. Maybe we can invest a little bit of time to make it easier for us going forward. I hate to say it like that because you're trying to make it better for the student, but strategically, if you frame it that way, I think I found that I get some mileage out of that.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think point sheets too. I think those are kind of easy to do.
I guess I want to take that just one step further, because again, I'm looking at the student that I have. If we don't address it, and he's certainly not diagnosed, but if we don't address it, it becomes a behavior management issue overall. So I'm already searching for what are the best ways to address this behavior. And now I have, you know, I'm opening up a little bit more and saying, well, wait a minute. I hadn't really thought along the ADHD line. However, I was working towards like a checklist of some kind. This opens it up even more so, because it will give me some other tools that I can try that may really benefit him going forward.
Right. And that's what I was hoping is to give you some tools, but then also give you the knowledge to help you start to come up with your own tools. That's one of the big things is I was hoping to do for you by helping you understand this. And then you guys can always, you guys can always email me. I don't know if Jen hasn't, she certainly has my permission to share my email address with you all. And I'll actually put it in the chat. I'm sorry if some of you guys put some chat stuff in here. I'm sorry. Everyone in meeting. I'm just going to type it in real quick.
Can I just also say, Randy, that, you know, all of you are dealing with, you know, the possibility of students going in and out of the classroom, being virtual, what happens when the kids quarantine and stuff like that. And one of the things I'm noticing even with my own son is that, you know, the executive functioning that is expected of him this year to be able to manage in 6th grade, all of his Google Classrooms, things like that. These are actually really useful skills, not just for kids with ADHD, but for all kids who are developing in terms of their executive functioning skills. And because they are sort of more isolated and working from home oftentimes in you know, with all this COVID stuff, I think that we're expecting them to be able to function more executively than we probably have ever needed them to before. They have to do a lot more self-regulation, a lot more planning of their own time and everything. So I think that these are useful skills and useful things to look at for the entire general population as well.
And that's interesting, because I think that's also kind of a silver lining to this is as challenging as it is, and obviously we'd want to avoid this. Like someone mentioned now, a lot of districts are not going to have snow days anymore, because then you can just do this and you know, the idea of saving some June days, you know, so, you know, and trading them in for, you know, snowy days sounds appealing to me, maybe not everybody. So, and plus you're learning a lot of technology that could be useful, and then if you have students that are going to college, you know, a lot of that's, you know, there's a lot more technology and independence there as well. So yeah, I think that's a great point. What else you got? I put my email in the chat. If you have an individual thing and you want to pick my brain, or if you want to collaborate, I enjoy collaborating with people, helping other people help their kids. What else? Anything else?
Hi, my name is Ashley. I'm asking this question as a social worker in the school system. And I wanted to know is it common for students with ADHD to exhibit depressive moods? Because I'm currently working with a student who struggles a lot with internalizing interactions that he sees as negative. And so it turns into a more severe mental health crisis in those moments because he's having difficulty understanding and understanding the interaction, and anything that's negative he internalizes and considers himself a bad student or a bad child. So I wanted to know if these behaviors were common and what strategies you have for working with students who do exhibit these behaviors.
That's, yeah, that's huge. So I don't have I haven't read research about ADHD specifically and depression or anything like that. But I think what you're also referencing is there is what we call secondary characteristics, which you maybe know about with kids with disabilities. So the primary characteristics are, how does the disability play out in the environment? If it's a vision issue, you can't see the board. That's a primary result of your disability. Secondary characteristics are the ones that are not directly associated with the disability, but that arise from how the disability plays out. For example, a student with a learning disability who has trouble reading. Well, now they may be averse to reading. They might be embarrassed by reading. They may have a lot of self-doubt. They may have anxiety about having to read. Those are not characteristics of a learning disability, but they are secondary characteristics. So all of these disabilities can result into anxiety and perhaps depression or things of that nature. So I can't get into more the depth of the direct connection and a physiological or a social connection to it, a health connection. But it's not surprising to me at all that it gets to be that challenging. I am as I'm answering questions, if you'll forgive me, I'm trying to multitask, because then that actually takes me to a video that I actually show new teachers that I train, and I think it'll speak to that. I think you'll see, as a social worker, I know that you'll be used to, you have knowledge of this. So I'm trying to find this video, and I think it's incredibly powerful, and I don't even know why I didn't think about showing it here previously. So I'm going to circle back when I find the video and then talk more about that, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, I found it. Okay. This is worth, let me see how much time this is. 5 minutes. This is absolutely worth our time here. So let me share this with you. And then as a social worker, I think you would totally, you will totally have seen this. Okay. It could be a little clunky at first, but my computer is buffering. I apologize. But can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay.
How old are you?
6.5. 6.
And what grade are you in?
First grade. First grade?
Do you like school?
Yeah.
No. Why do you like school?
Because I like to play with my friends at recess.
Why don't you like school?
Because I have to do a lot of stuff and my little sister's really cute and I want to spend more time with my little sister.
How long does it take you to do your homework? A long time or a short time?
Usually 5 or 10 minutes. I don't know, sort of in the middle.
Do you have a hard time with your homework?
Sometimes.
How do you do on tests?
Good. Well, I usually get A's, but not A pluses, so I don't know. And I almost get every single one right.
Well, aren't you still proud of yourself for getting A's?
I don't know, I just feel normal.
You just feel normal, you don't feel proud of yourself?
No, I just feel normal.
Okay. Do you have a lot of friends?
Yeah. No.
How do you feel about having a lot of friends?
Happy.
How do you feel about not having a lot of friends?
Lonely.
Do you get invited to parties?
Yeah. Not usually.
Do you ever get bullied?
No. Sometimes.
Do you think you are smart?
Yeah. I don't know.
Do you think you are handsome?
Yeah.
Do you think you are pretty?
Sometimes.
What do you like about yourself?
How smart I am and how good I draw. I like myself because I like Jesus and God and they're really important.
Is there anything that you dislike about yourself?
Nope. Sometimes I be bad.
How do you be bad?
By giving attitude to my mom.
Why do you think you give attitude?
I don't know, sometimes I just get into moods. It depends on how good the day is. When I have a bad day, then I get all grumpy and negative. And when I have a good day, then I get all positive and happy.
What do you want other kids like your age to know that don't have ADHD? What do you want them to know about the kids that do have ADHD?
That they are better at listening than them, and that they could help them.
And how can they help the kids with ADHD?
By telling them that whatever you do, it's still right because you tried your best.
All right, that's pretty powerful. Yeah, I always get touched by those things. So that kind of shows you the secondary characteristics at play. Sorry, I didn't mean to be a downer there. That's tough. Some tough stuff. Yeah, you're welcome. What other questions? Anybody?
I work in the high school with kids. I'm a paraprofessional, so I'm in class working with, students that are resource students or students that just need a little extra support in the classroom. And most of the teachers that I work with are amazing. And they do a lot of the strategies that you broke down in here. So I feel very fortunate to be in a system that works that well. So I see it at work. I see it at play. I have a 7-year-old here that he's my grandson. I've adopted him. And he is a very high energy kid. And he's a bit young. Nobody's brought it to my attention that, he needs to be evaluated or anything. But I often wonder, because he shows a lot of the signs. Is he just a normal high energy 7-year-old, or are we looking at something that may present later?
I referenced my daughter earlier, and she's 8, and I've had concerns. I'm not convinced, but I'm cautiously, so I actually asked someone at school to check it out. And they have what they call they have student find, child find. Have you heard of that? It's part of the law. It's a mandate where districts then have to seek out students that potentially have a disability. I don't know the exact phrasing, but it's called child find. And so one of the things you could do is reference that when you talk to the school and say, per child find in IDEA, I'd like to have this maybe, checked out. It certainly doesn't hurt. And then I think, keeping an eye on that's important, because sooner the better, the sooner you get some supports, the sooner.
Oh, absolutely. He was in birth to 3, and then he was followed up with 2-on-1 until he was 5. And, there's been nothing that has shown any red flags to anyone, but I just see a kid that is, unable to sit.
Yeah.
And he's in gymnastics and skating because we need to get that energy somewhere.
Right. And then one of the things that a big approach for me is I like to know the disability of a student I'm helping, but I'm really big on, let me just, regardless of the reason why they need help, give them this, be responsive. But getting the teachers to do that, that can be challenging because for a variety of reasons. So I think investigating it is certainly worth it, at least for a 504, if not for an IEP, if that is indeed the case. So, but that's what I would say is the child find is the way to go. I asked someone at school, and they went in and observed her a couple times and gave me a report. So that's something that I would recommend. And
Okay.
And you as a para, thank you. I mean, paras are, love my son's paras, because that's it's fairly thankless job a lot of times.
It absolutely is. And because our high school is closed, I had the opportunity to work in his school this week, and actually with one of the students that I was with had 2 classes with him. So I was able to observe him in the classroom.
Wow.
And I don't see what I see at home in the classroom. He was way more attentive at school.
And that's what they said with my daughter too. So it could be setting oriented, it could be just an energetic kid. And if there's less structure, which a home obviously is going to have less structure, then there's more ability then to be doing that stuff. So then that's a good sign. If he can self-regulate, student can self-regulate some, then that's a good sign. Right. But it doesn't hurt to get it checked out in my view.
Yeah, I'm totally proactive. So.
Right.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
This was great, Randy. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you all for joining us. And yeah, Randy, there was a request to put maybe the link to that video in the chat if you're able. If not, you can just send it to me and I can send it along with anything else you send me. I would again encourage people in the very beginning of the chat, there is a link to a survey. So if you have any feedback, that would be great. There's also an opportunity there to ask for any other kind of professional development that you guys are interested in. It's nice to see some people that I haven't seen in a while. Hi, Ellen. I haven't gotten to see you in my workshops in a while. I miss seeing everybody in person, but it's nice to see you on Zoom. Oh, you're muted.
Recently in another one, but I think I was hiding behind my name.
Hiding.
Yes.
No hiding from me. Well, it's nice to see your face.
I just posted the link to that video of the girl. And then all the Barclays stuff, that's, if you look at the link where I put in resources, a lot of the Barclays stuff I referred to is listed in there.
Awesome. We all set then, Randy?
It's up to you guys. I'm here to help.
We don't see any other questions, so thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for stopping by, everybody.
Have a good night, everyone.